Savannah never expected to find her billionaire boss broken in a place as vulnerable as a shower. Jackson Reed had always been a man carved from stone. That was the first thing anyone said about him. Cold, brilliant, ruthless. The type of man who could freeze a boardroom with a glance and dismantle a multi-million-dollar deal with a single sentence. Savannah had worked under him for almost a year, and in all that time, he had never once smiled at her. Not genuinely, not warmly, just the occasional curt nod, the usual clipped commands and long silences charged with pressure. She had learned how to breathe quietly in his presence, how to disappear when necessary, how to anticipate his needs before he even said a word. Working for Jackson was like walking on glass with bare feet. There was no room for mistakes. That night, everything changed. It was nearly midnight when Savannah climbed the elevator to his penthouse. A last-minute investor document had to be reviewed and signed before morning. He had left early, which was unusual, but Savannah, ever the diligent assistant, had offered to drop it off. The building was silent, the hallway dark. She had expected silence behind the penthouse door, too, but the moment she stepped off the elevator, she noticed something odd. The door was ajar. Steam curled out into the hallway, thick and heavy. Her first instinct was to leave, but then came the sound, water running, sharp and unending, and nothing else. No voices, no music, no footsteps, just the distant, endless cascade of water. She hesitated. Jackson's voice echoed in her memory. He did not like intrusions. He did not tolerate weakness. But something pulled at her, a thread of concern she could not ignore. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The living room was as immaculate as ever, marble floors, dark furniture, city lights glittering through tall glass windows. But it was the trail of condensation on the walls that guided her toward the hallway, toward the master bath. Savannah paused outside the door. "Jackson?" she called softly. No answer. Her heart pounded, and then she pushed the door open. The scene stole her breath. There he was, Jackson Reed, her cold, untouchable boss, sitting on the tiled shower floor, water pouring down over his head and shoulders, naked, completely exposed, his back hunched forward, his arms wrapped around himself. And in one trembling hand, a small photograph, burned at the edges, wrinkled, fading. His head was bowed, face buried in one palm. His chest rose and fell with uneven, shallow breaths. He was crying. Savannah froze. Everything in her screamed to turn back, to shut the door and pretend she had never seen him like this, but she could not move, could not look away. She had never seen a man so broken, not just vulnerable, shattered. Then he looked up. Their eyes met. His were red-rimmed, glassy, and full of something between rage and despair. She saw a plea buried in them. A warning, too. Her presence had pierced through something he had spent years building, and it terrified him. "Get out." His voice was hoarse. A command, yes, but it cracked at the end. Savannah backed away, her heart pounding against her ribs. She did not know what she had just witnessed, but she knew with chilling certainty that Jackson Reed was not the man the world believed he was. And neither of them could pretend otherwise anymore. Savannah Hill was used to being invisible. It was how she survived in New York, by blending in, keeping her head down, and working harder than everyone else. She did not come from wealth or connections. Her mother had been a waitress, her father unknown, and she had spent most of her life proving she was more than her circumstances. Landing a job as the executive assistant to Jackson Reed had felt like a miracle at first. Now, nearly 11 months in, it felt more like a long audition she was barely passing. Jackson was the founder and CEO of Reed Tech, a company that had taken artificial intelligence to new heights. In public, he was always poised, impeccably dressed, and emotionally distant. In private, or at least in the office, he was no different. He rarely spoke more than necessary, never engaged in small talk, and never made the same mistake twice. Meetings with him were like tests. If you hesitated, stumbled, or guessed, He would dismiss you with a look so cold it could silence an entire room. The employees called him the Ice King behind his back. Savannah had heard it more than once while pretending not to. Despite his reputation, she had never feared him the way others seemed to. Maybe because she had seen worse. Maybe because, in some strange way, she understood people who built walls around themselves. She had built her own, after all. They just looked different. The office sat high above Midtown Manhattan, floor-to-ceiling glass windows offering a constant reminder of the distance between their world and the one below. Jackson rarely left the building during the day. His life seemed to begin and end within those walls. His penthouse, just a few blocks from headquarters, was just as sterile and controlled. Savannah had only been there twice before, once to deliver a confidential document and another time to retrieve a forgotten laptop. Both times, she had been instructed to wait at the door and not go further. That night, however, had rewritten everything. She had not seen Jackson since she fled the bathroom, her cheeks burning, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. The image of him soaked and trembling, clutching that half-burned photograph, haunted her. It refused to leave her thoughts, following her home, sitting with her in silence, chasing her through dreams. The next morning at the office, he had acted as if nothing had happened. He arrived exactly at 8:45, dressed in a charcoal suit with not a hair out of place. He wore his usual watch, carried his usual black folder, and offered nothing more than a brief nod when he passed her desk. Savannah's fingers trembled on her keyboard as she tried to focus, but the memory pressed in like a bruise that kept aching when touched. Throughout the day, he gave her instructions without looking at her. His voice was steady, measured, and colder than usual. It was as if he had built new walls overnight, higher and thicker than before. She tried to tell herself it was better this way. Whatever she had seen, whatever crack had appeared in his armor, it was not her place to acknowledge it. Still, something inside her refused to let go. She found herself stealing glances at him during meetings, watching the way his jaw clenched when others spoke, noticing the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped restlessly when no one was looking. She had memorized the rhythms of his moods long ago, but now they meant something different. They no longer felt like the habits of a strict employer. They felt like symptoms of a man barely holding himself together. Her curiosity deepened into something else. Concern, maybe? Or something dangerously close to it. She knew better than to mix emotions with work, especially with a man like Jackson Reed. But it was too late. She had seen him at his most raw, and she could not forget it. Late one evening, after everyone had left, Savannah stayed behind to organize next week's itinerary. The office was quiet, lit only by the city lights outside and the soft glow of her desk lamp. She heard footsteps and looked up, startled. Jackson stood by the window, looking out at the skyline. He said nothing, and neither did she. But in that moment, with only silence between them, Savannah realized something undeniable. Jackson Reed was not made of stone. He was made of pain, and she had seen the part of him he never meant to show anyone. The days that followed were strange. Savannah noticed the shift, subtle but impossible to ignore. Jackson no longer barked orders at her with the same edge. His words were shorter, quieter, almost hesitant. He still avoided eye contact most of the time, but when their eyes did meet, there was something else there, something searching, uncertain, and conflicted. At first, Savannah chalked it up to discomfort. Maybe he hated that she had seen him that way. Vulnerable, human. But it felt deeper than shame. It felt like fear. He watched her the way someone watches a fire they cannot control, both drawn in and terrified of getting burned. One afternoon, while reviewing a product pitch with the design team, Savannah noticed Jackson walk in and stand silently in the back of the room. He did not speak. He simply watched. But his eyes were not on the presentation or the diagrams glowing on the wall. They were on her. After the meeting, as people trickled out, he approached slowly, his expression unreadable, She braced herself, expecting a reprimand or maybe even a cold dismissal. Instead, he simply said, "You handled that better than I would have." She blinked, uncertain whether it was a compliment or sarcasm, but the absence of his usual sharp tone told her it was genuine. That moment lingered with her all day. Then came the night everything tilted. Savannah stayed late again, finalizing logistics for a major investor trip. Jackson had a habit of working from the upper-level lounge after hours, preferring quiet and solitude. Around 10, she decided to bring him a coffee, unsure if the gesture would be welcome. As she approached the glass-walled lounge, she saw him standing alone, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, his jaw tight as he stared out into the night. She knocked gently and stepped inside. "I thought you might need this," she said, holding the cup toward him. His gaze dropped to it, then to her. For a moment, he looked like he might refuse. Then he reached for it, their fingers brushing. His skin was warm. Hers trembled. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded, unsure what else to say, and turned to leave. But then his voice stopped her. "Do you believe people can change?" She froze. Her hand hovered over the door handle. Slowly, she turned back toward him. "I think we all want to, but wanting isn't always enough." He nodded, as if the answer confirmed something for him, though she could not tell what. That night she lay awake in bed, replaying every word, every glance, every pause in their conversation. There was a weight to their silences now, a current pulling them toward something neither of them fully understood. The next few weeks blurred into a strange rhythm. They began spending more time together after hours, sometimes working late, sometimes talking about things that had nothing to do with work. Jackson never offered details about his personal life, but he started asking questions about hers. Her childhood, her favorite books, what kind of music she listened to on rainy days. At first, Savannah answered carefully, unsure if this was just another test. But when he responded by sharing that he used to play piano before college, badly, he admitted, with a rare crooked smile, she realized this was not strategy, it was connection. One evening, as she was about to leave, Jackson called her back. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "I saw you that night," he said. She froze. Her pulse quickened. "I know," she replied. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "You shouldn't have had to see that. It wasn't fair." Savannah stepped closer. "Maybe not, but I did. And I'm still here." He stared at her then, like he was trying to figure out why. She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't have one that made sense. Another day, she walked into his office to find him staring at something on his desk. As she approached, she saw it. A small, damaged photograph, the same one from the shower. He caught her glance and quickly flipped it over. Her heart beat faster. "I never asked," she said, her voice careful. "But the person in that photo, they mattered, didn't they?" His shoulders tensed. He didn't answer, not with words, but she saw it in his eyes. The pain, the memory, the regret. The space between them narrowed. Emotion hummed in the air like static, but still they did not touch. Not yet. One night, as she passed by his office, she heard the sound of a glass shattering. She rushed in to find him standing over the broken remains of a whiskey tumbler, his knuckles white, breathing hard. "I messed up another deal," he muttered. "They think I'm unfeeling, robotic, and maybe they're right." She stepped forward cautiously. "You're not. You just don't show things the way others do." His eyes met hers, full of storm. "But you saw, didn't you? That night. You saw who I really am." Savannah nodded slowly. "I did." "And?" he asked, voice hoarse. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "And I didn't run." He sat down heavily, the tension draining from him. For the first time, she sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. They said nothing for several minutes. Then he whispered, "Sometimes I forget what it feels like to be seen." Savannah replied, "Maybe you just needed someone who wasn't afraid to look." After that night, something shifted. Their interactions grew more natural, more grounded. Jackson started bringing her coffee instead. He began checking in, not because he needed something, but because he wanted to. She noticed the way he lingered at her desk a moment too long, the way his hand brushed hers as they passed each other, the way his voice softened whenever he said her name. But their connection did not go unnoticed. Whispers circulated, colleagues exchanged glances. A junior executive even dared to joke that Savannah must be the new Miss Reed. Jackson shut it down with a single glance, but the damage was done. One afternoon, as they rode the elevator together, he broke the silence. "This is dangerous, you know." She looked at him, surprised. "Us, whatever this is becoming, it can't go where it's going." Savannah's heart clenched. Then why let it start? He exhaled slowly. "Because I couldn't stop it." Their closeness continued to grow in the spaces between protocol and restraint, a quiet dinner in the office kitchen, a shared cab ride home after a long presentation, a conversation in his private library about old vinyl records and the meaning of legacy. Each moment stitched them closer, like a thread pulled tight but never snapped. Still, Savannah knew they were balancing on a blade, and beneath every look, every soft word, lay a question neither dared ask aloud. Were they falling for each other, or were they just two broken people trying to stay warm in the same storm? One night, after a grueling investor pitch, they ended up alone on the building's rooftop terrace. The city glowed below, endless and distant. Jackson leaned on the railing, silent. Savannah stood beside him. He spoke first. "Sometimes I think I'm just pretending to be someone people can trust." She turned toward him. "You don't have to pretend with me." His jaw clenched. "That's what scares me." Savannah hesitated, then reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. And in that quiet, trembling moment, the air between them thick with things unspoken, she felt the first undeniable truth settle in her chest. She was falling in love with him. And she was terrified. He would never believe he deserved it. Savannah never expected the truth to come in pieces, scattered like fragile glass along the edges of their growing connection. It began with small things, barely noticeable moments that only meant something because of the silence they broke. One evening, while organizing reports in Jackson's office, she noticed a book on his shelf had been moved. Its spine was cracked, the pages slightly curled as if recently read. When she pulled it out, a photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. She bent down, picked it up, and stared. It was the same photo from the shower, the one he had clutched like it was the last piece of himself he had left. This time she looked closer. 3 people stood together, smiling at the camera. A younger Jackson, barely out of high school, a woman with long dark hair, her hand on his shoulder, and a boy who looked just like Jackson but smaller, with softer eyes and a quiet, curious smile. Savannah's heart slowed. A twin. When Jackson entered the room and saw the photo in her hand, he froze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She waited, giving him the chance to retreat or lie, but he did neither. He walked to his desk, sank into the chair, and said quietly, "His name was Jasper. He was my twin. I haven't spoken about him in years." Savannah sat across from him, the photo still in her lap. She didn't ask anything more. She just listened. Jackson's voice was raw but steady. Jasper was different. He was on the spectrum, brilliant in his own way, but the world didn't make space for boys like him, not in our school, not in our family. Our parents didn't understand him, didn't try to. They wanted him fixed, not accepted. So it was me. I was the only one who understood how he thought, what he needed when he shut down, how to talk to him when he couldn't talk back. I was the bridge between him and the world. He looked away then, jaw clenched. And I failed him. Savannah leaned in slightly, her voice soft. "What happened?" Jackson exhaled. "He started having night terrors, would scream, panic, knock over lamps, set off alarms. My parents blamed him, threatened to send him away. I begged them to give him time. I was going to find help. I was 18. I had just gotten into MIT. One night I left to stay at a friend's dorm for the weekend. I needed space. I thought he'd be fine. He wasn't. There was a fire. No one knows how it started, but he was gone by the time I got back. My parents never forgave me. I never forgave myself. Savannah stared at him, her throat tight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He gave a hollow laugh. "Don't be. I'm the reason he died. I chose my future over him. I left when he needed me most." She shook her head. "You were just a kid." He looked at her, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. "And he was just a boy who trusted me. And I let him down." Silence stretched between them, heavy and slow. The city lights blinked beyond the glass. Finally, Savannah reached across the desk and placed her hand over his. His fingers didn't move at first, but then they curled around hers. "You carry too much alone," she said quietly. "Maybe you've punished yourself long enough." Jackson didn't answer, but his grip tightened. After that night, something changed between them. He didn't shut her out anymore. He didn't pretend. If anything, he leaned into her presence like a man who had been walking through fog and had finally found something solid to hold on to. In the weeks that followed, he began sharing pieces of Jasper, little memories, like how he used to line up all his pencils in color order before doing homework, how he hated loud noises but loved thunderstorms, how he hummed to himself when he read, not because he was trying to be annoying, but because it helped him focus. Savannah absorbed it all, feeling like she was being invited into a sacred part of Jackson's life that no one else had ever seen. One night, he handed her an old notebook. Inside were drawings, most of them childlike, some surprisingly intricate. Robots, mazes, spaceships. "Jasper's dreams," Jackson said. He wanted to build machines that could think like people, but kinder. Savannah ran her fingers along the worn paper. "And now you do." Jackson nodded slowly. "I think I built Reed Tech for him, even if I didn't realize it at the time." She smiled, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than politeness. "Then maybe it's time to build something for yourself, too." The words hung in the air between them. Neither of them pushed further, but the message was clear. Healing had begun. But peace rarely lasts in its purest form. One afternoon, a visitor arrived at the office unannounced. Alicia Hart. She was a strategic advisor from London who had once consulted for Reed Tech's European expansion. But more than that, she had history with Jackson, the kind that left whispers behind long after the doors had closed. Alicia was polished, magnetic, and walked like she owned every room she entered. Savannah met her in the lobby, where she offered a tight smile and said, "Jackson didn't tell me he had such charming assistants now." Savannah returned the smile with practiced calm, but her chest tightened. Later that evening, Savannah stepped into the elevator to head home. Just as the doors began to close, Alicia slipped inside. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Alicia said lightly, "You know, I tried to fix him once. Thought I could patch over the holes. But Jackson doesn't heal, he just adapts. Like code." Savannah turned toward her slowly. "Maybe he just needed the right environment." Alicia's smile thinned. "Or maybe you're just the distraction he's using until the guilt catches up again." When the elevator stopped, Alicia stepped out without looking back. Savannah remained frozen inside. That night, Savannah couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Alicia's words. Was she just a placeholder? A stand-in for someone who could never be brought back? The next morning, she was quiet. Jackson noticed immediately. He asked if she was all right. She said yes, but her voice lacked conviction. He studied her for a long moment, then let it go. For the first time in weeks, the silence between them wasn't comforting. It was sharp. 3 days passed like that, awkward, distant, careful. Jackson became colder again. Not like before. This was different. He was protecting something, or maybe preparing for loss. Savannah tried to stay composed, but her heart ached. Finally, one evening, she found herself standing outside his office door, unsure if she had the courage to ask the question burning in her mind. Am I just filling a space someone else left behind? She didn't say it aloud. Not yet. But it sat on her tongue like a secret begging to be released. Jackson was seated at his desk when she entered, looking exhausted. His eyes flicked up. Everything all right? She nodded. Lied, yes. He went back to reviewing the file in front of him. She hesitated, then asked, Who was Alicia to you? His pen froze. He looked at her carefully. No one that matters anymore. That's not what she thinks. Jackson's jaw tightened. Alicia liked the version of me that felt nothing. That version died the night you walked into my bathroom. Savannah stared at him. Her voice dropped. And the one who's here now? Is he going to stay? Jackson stood slowly, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of her. His voice was low. I don't know how to be this person, Savannah. I don't know how to love someone without wondering when they'll leave. Her eyes filled with tears. Then let me show you I'm not going anywhere. For a long moment they stood in silence. Then with a trembling breath he reached for her hand. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. It wasn't a declaration. But it was the beginning of something irreversible. Something neither of them could step back from. And in that fragile, intimate quiet, Jackson finally let someone stand beside the broken parts of him without turning away. The fragility of something new is never more obvious than when it begins to matter. For weeks, Savannah and Jackson continued to orbit each other, closer now than ever, yet still dancing along the edge of something they hadn't named aloud. He had started inviting her to meetings he never used to include her in, asking her opinion on product direction, consulting her before making major moves, and even trusting her with personal travel logistics, something he had always guarded with obsessive control. It was subtle, but the shift was undeniable. People noticed. Whispers turned into stares, and the team began walking on eggshells around them. Rumors weren't new to Savannah, but these felt heavier, less office gossip and more like a storm quietly building. Jackson ignored it, or pretended to. He never addressed the talk, never acknowledged the changed dynamic between them, at least not in words. But it showed, in the way he looked for her in the room before speaking, in how he softened only when she was near, in the way his fingers would brush against hers in passing, lingering just a moment too long. Yet despite all of it, they hadn't crossed the line. Not physically, not officially. They lived in a space that was deeper than friendship, but not quite defined. It should have been enough. For a while, it was. Until Alicia returned. Her presence became more frequent, always under the guise of business. She was consulting on a new international partnership. Her experience made her an asset, or so the board insisted. Savannah watched from the sidelines as Alicia inserted herself into meetings, conversations, dinners. She made herself visible, purposefully so. And Jackson, despite his effort to remain neutral, didn't stop her. He didn't push her away. That unsettled Savannah more than she was willing to admit. One evening, after a long strategy session, Savannah walked past the private lounge and saw them inside. Alicia sat too close. Her hand brushed Jackson's sleeve as she leaned in to whisper something. Jackson didn't move. He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't look like anything at all. Savannah turned away before they could see her. The next morning, Jackson seemed distant. He barely acknowledged her when she entered the room, didn't ask about her night, didn't linger at her desk. Something in him had shifted again, like a wall rebuilt overnight. Savannah tried to remain professional, but the silence between them began to feel like punishment. That afternoon, Alicia found her near the elevator, alone. The smirk on her face was smug, calm, composed. "You really think you're different?" she said, voice low but sharp. "You think you're not just another warm body he hides behind when the guilt gets too loud?" Savannah didn't answer. Alicia stepped closer. "He's still in love with a ghost. You're just a replacement who doesn't know it yet." Savannah said nothing, but the words rooted deep. That night, Jackson called her into his office. He was quiet, pacing, distracted. I'm thinking about taking the Hong Kong deal, he said suddenly. It would mean travel, a lot of it, weeks at a time, maybe months. Savannah stared at him. Why? He shrugged. It's an opportunity we can't ignore. Or maybe it's an escape, she thought. She didn't say that. Instead, she asked carefully, Are you going alone? Jackson's eyes met hers. Alicia will be part of the project team. Savannah nodded slowly, her chest tightened. Of course. Silence fell between them. Jackson looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. She turned to leave, but paused. I thought we were building something. Were we just pretending? Jackson didn't answer. She left his office with her heart in her throat. The next few days passed in a blur. Savannah kept her head down, drowning in logistics and client briefs, trying not to care. But the space between her and Jackson had grown colder. He had shut her out before, but not like this. This time it hurt, because now she knew what it felt like when he let her in. And now he was choosing distance again. One night, she came home late and found herself staring at the photo Jackson had once shown her. Jasper's drawing was still tucked inside her notebook. She ran her fingers over the lines, remembering the way his voice had broken when he told her the story. That man, the one who trusted her enough to fall apart, felt a world away now. The next morning, Savannah walked into the office and heard Alicia laughing in Jackson's office. She didn't go inside. She couldn't. Instead, she sent in his reports by email and left early. Her absence went unmentioned. That night, Jackson showed up at her apartment unannounced. He stood outside her door, hair damp from rain, suit jacket wrinkled. She opened the door, startled. He looked like he hadn't slept. I needed to see you, he said. She stepped aside and let him in. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Savannah asked the question that had been eating at her. Am I just someone to help you forget the pain? His eyes widened slightly. What? She swallowed. You never say how you feel. You never tell me what I am to you. You say you trust me, but then you pull away the moment things get real. And now Alicia is back. You're leaving. What am I supposed to think? Jackson's voice was quiet. I never meant to hurt you, but you are hurting me right now, just by not saying anything, by making me feel like I'm just standing in someone else's shadow. He looked at her then, truly looked at her. You're not in anyone's shadow. You're the only thing that makes the dark feel less cold. Then why won't you choose me? He didn't answer. Savannah's voice cracked. If you can't be honest with me, then this, whatever this is, has to stop. I can't keep wondering if I'm just a momentary distraction. I can't keep loving someone who's still chasing ghosts. Jackson stood abruptly. I'm not ready, he said. His voice was sharp, brittle. I'm trying, but I'm not ready to be the man you need. Then maybe you never will be. She didn't mean to sound cruel, but it came out harder than she wanted. Jackson's jaw tightened. I should go. She nodded once. He walked to the door, paused, then left. The sound of it closing echoed like finality. That night, Savannah cried harder than she had in years, not because he left, but because she had hoped he wouldn't. Because for a while she had believed he was healing, that she had helped him find his way back to himself. But now she wasn't sure if he had ever truly let her in, or if she had simply walked into a room that was never hers to stay in. She spent the next 2 days avoiding him, working remotely, claiming exhaustion. He didn't call, he didn't text, and with each hour that passed, the distance between them grew heavier. What broke her most was the silence, the knowing that he could have fought for her, but chose not to. Then came the message. Short, simple, just 3 words. I was wrong. The message sat on her phone for hours before she dared to open it again. I was wrong, no punctuation, no explanation. Just those 3 words typed in Jackson's usual clipped fashion. But this time, Savannah could feel the weight behind them, as if every syllable had been carved out of regret. She reread the message until her eyes blurred. Still, she didn't respond. She wasn't ready. Not yet, because part of her needed more than just words. She needed to know if he had changed, if he truly understood what he had broken between them. And some part of her, the part still aching, didn't believe 3 words could fix anything. The next day, she returned to the office. Her desk felt colder, the air stiffer. People looked at her with quiet curiosity, as if waiting to see if she would fall or rise. Jackson didn't appear. His office was locked, his schedule cleared. No one seemed to know where he was. Savannah kept her head down and finished her reports. But something felt wrong, off, empty. That night, as she left the building, the doorman handed her an envelope. No return address, no name. Inside was a folded piece of paper, handwritten in a script she didn't recognize at first. It was careful, slow, as if written by someone who had forgotten how to form letters. Her breath caught as she read the name at the top. Jasper Reed. The letter wasn't long, just a few lines, but it wasn't the content that shattered her. It was the realization that it was a letter Jackson had kept, a letter his brother had written to him when they were 15. "I'm sorry I broke your robot. I just wanted to see how it worked. Please don't be mad. You're the best brother. I love you more than computers." Savannah clutched the paper to her chest. The ache she'd felt for days cracked open into something deeper. And without thinking, she grabbed her coat and ran. She didn't know where she was going until she was already there. The therapy center for neurodiverse children, tucked quietly into a side street near Central Park, was a place Jackson had once mentioned in passing. Somewhere he'd donated to but never visited. She found him sitting on a bench in the garden outside, hunched forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the ground. The moment he looked up and saw her, something shifted in his expression. Relief, fear, hope. She sat beside him without a word. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I came here because I didn't know where else to go." He paused. "There was a boy inside today, nonverbal. He built a tower with blocks and knocked it down over and over, just like Jasper used to." Savannah glanced at him. "And you thought if you could sit here long enough, the guilt would go away?" He shook his head. "No, I just needed to remember who I used to be. Before the silence, before the shame, I wanted to find the part of me that still believed I could be good." Savannah's voice was barely a whisper. "Why send me the letter?" Jackson turned toward her slowly. "Because it's the only piece of him I have that feels like forgiveness. And maybe if you read it, you'd understand why I break the way I do, why I run, why I hurt people even when I don't mean to." She swallowed hard. "I don't want an apology. I want honesty. I want to know that when you look at me, you see me, not a distraction, not a temporary fix, not a shadow." Jackson nodded, his voice tight. "I do. I see you every day, every minute, even when I try not to. You're the only person who's ever looked at the broken parts of me and stayed. That's not temporary. That's the most terrifying thing I've ever known." Savannah stared at him, her heart pounding. "Then stop running. Be terrified. But stay." Jackson reached for her hand. "I don't know if I can be everything you deserve, but I know I don't want to go back to being the man I was before you." Her fingers wrapped around his. "Then start here. Be this man, now." He nodded, eyes shining. "Okay." Later that night, they walked through the city in silence. When they reached her apartment building, he hesitated before speaking. "There's something I want to show you. It's not far." She nodded and followed. He led her to an old brownstone in the West Village. Inside, the space was mostly empty, unfinished walls, exposed beams, dust covering the floor. But in the corner sat a long table with sketches, models, and design plans. Savannah stepped closer and saw what it was. A blueprint for a tech-based learning center designed for kids like Jasper. Adaptive software, sensory-safe rooms, interactive systems powered by AI. Jackson's voice broke as he explained. "This was our dream, his and mine. I never had the courage to finish it until you." Savannah turned to him. "This is beautiful." He met her eyes. "So are you." And then, after everything they had held back for so long, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, trembling, and full of everything they hadn't said. She kissed him back with the same need, the same hope, and in that moment, they both knew they had crossed a line neither of them would ever want to return from. The world outside faded, and all that remained was this space, unfinished, imperfect, and filled with the beginning of something real. The next morning, Savannah woke up in his arms, sunlight warming their skin through the window. Jackson watched her like she was something sacred. "I never told you how the fire started," he said quietly. Savannah looked up. "You don't have to." "I want to. I think it was my fault. I left the gas stove on. I forgot. I was rushing. He trailed off. Her hand found his. "You were 18. Scared. Human. It's time to stop punishing yourself." His eyes filled, but he nodded. And for the first time, she saw a different kind of man looking back at her. One who wanted to live again. That day, Jackson brought her to the cemetery, a place he had avoided for years. The rain came lightly as they stood at Jasper's grave. Jackson placed a white lily down, fingers trembling. "I miss him every day." Savannah wrapped her arms around his waist. "He would be proud of you." He turned to her, his voice breaking. "So am I. Of you, of us. I'm tired of letting ghosts dictate my future." Savannah looked up at him. "Then let's build something they'd be proud of." He nodded. "Yes, let's." And in that quiet, sacred place, soaked in rain and memory, Jackson Reed finally let go of the guilt he had carried for half his life. Not because he forgot, but because he had finally chosen to forgive himself. And standing beside him was the one person who had never asked him to be perfect, only present, only honest, only real. Savannah was no longer just his assistant. She was his partner, his anchor. And for the first time in a long time, Jackson Reed believed he could be more than the sum of his mistakes. He could be whole again. Months passed, and the rhythm between Savannah and Jackson settled into something real, something ordinary, but filled with meaning. They no longer needed to tiptoe around their feelings or hide behind professional walls. At the office, people gradually stopped whispering. Their presence together became normal, even respected. The man once known as the Ice King now laughed in meetings, listened more than he spoke, and walked the halls with a quiet confidence that no longer came from control, but from clarity. He wasn't trying to be perfect anymore. He was trying to be present. The center they had dreamed of was finally under construction. Jackson insisted on handling every detail himself. Savannah stood beside him through all of it. Permits, designs, fundraising events. The building would bear Jasper's name. The inside would carry his spirit. There were moments when Jackson would pause during planning, his eyes distant, the grief never fully gone. But each time, Savannah would touch his arm, bring him back, and remind him why they were doing this. They weren't erasing the past. They were honoring it by building something that lived beyond it. One crisp autumn morning, Savannah walked into Jackson's penthouse to find him standing in the shower again. For a moment, her heart jumped, memories crashing into her like waves. But this time, it was different. He wasn't broken. He wasn't crying. He stood under the warm water, holding a newborn baby girl in his arms, their daughter. Her tiny face was pressed against his chest, her fingers curled into his shirt. Savannah froze in the doorway, her breath caught somewhere between joy and disbelief. He turned to her slowly, eyes soft, voice full of awe. "She's perfect." She stepped inside, still wrapped in her robe, and slid her arms around him from behind. The three of them stood there together, surrounded by steam and warmth, cocooned in something sacred. Savannah rested her cheek against his back and whispered, "Do you remember the first time I saw you like this?" He nodded slowly. "I remember thinking I'd lost everything." She kissed his shoulder. "And now?" He turned, careful not to wake the baby, and looked at her with a love that held no fear, no guilt, just truth. "Now, I know I've been found." Later that day, he placed the old photo of Jasper and himself into a new frame. It sat on a shelf beside a newer picture, their daughter sleeping in Savannah's arms. Side by side, past and present, wounds and healing, love that had never really died, only waited to be transformed. As the sun set behind the glass walls of their home, Savannah curled into Jackson's side on the couch, her fingers brushing his. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, how pain had made them careful, how love had made them brave. She remembered the coldness of that first night, the ache in his eyes, the silence in the office that followed. And now here they were, not flawless, not free of scars, but together. And in that togetherness was something stronger than perfection. It was commitment. It was grace. It was the quiet miracle of two people who had every reason to give up, but chose to try again. "We don't heal by forgetting," she whispered. "We heal by building something new, beside the memories." Jackson nodded, his voice low but steady. "And with you, I finally believe I can." And as their daughter stirred gently in her sleep, wrapped in warmth and light, Savannah knew one thing for sure. They hadn't just survived the storm, they had built a life in the clearing. We don't always get to choose the pain that shapes us, but we can choose what we build from it. And sometimes, the most broken love stories are the ones that shine the brightest when they heal.